Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Monday, February 10th, 2025. We are here for a land use hearing. As is our tradition, we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us if you're able.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for being here this afternoon. My name is Kristen Stevens, currently Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. I'm joined by my colleagues, Commissioner John Kafalis and Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally. Behind us, we have Deirdre O'Neill from the Clerk's Office taking notes and recording the meeting. This is a public meeting, and we thank you for being here. Across the way, we have Frank Haug from the County Attorney's Office and a variety of folks from other county departments. I'll turn it over to our planning manager, Jenny Axmaker, and she will do introductions and share some of our hearing procedures. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm joined at the dais by Tracy Chambeau from our engineering department, Cassidy Fior, principal planner with community development, and Ryan Oswandell with our community resource group, our planning admin staff. Across the way, we have our environmental planner, Scott Benton, joining us. Hiding in the back, we have two representatives from the health department. We have Leah Schneider and Ashton Brodall, as well as another member from our county attorney's office. So with that, we respectfully request that all members of the audience silence their electronic devices. Please help yourself to a copy of the agenda and hearing procedure instructions, which are located on the wall just to the right of the hearing room entrance over here. And for those of you joining us online, you can find those posted on the website at larimer.org/BOCC/commissioners-meetings. Please wait to speak until recognized by the chair. Please maintain civility, refraining from audience applause, comments, or disruptions, whether positive or negative. Please make all comments to the Board of County Commissioners from the podium. A portable microphone is available as needed. Please state your name at the beginning of the comments and provide the spelling of your name if it's unique. Please speak directly and loudly into the microphone so that those remote participants joining us on Zoom and anyone needing an assisted listening device may hear us. We do have assisted listening devices available for the hearing impaired. For those on Zoom, attendees will be muted until they are recognized by the chair. If an online attendee wishes to speak or request a consent item to be removed, please use the raise your hand function on the Zoom control bar or *9 on your phone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. So move on to the agenda for this afternoon. We have somewhat of an unusual agenda this afternoon in that we don't have any consent agenda items. What we do have is a tabled item from January 27th, 2025, and it is a discussion item, and we will have a full review of this item, full hearing. So the one item on the agenda that we will have the public hearing for is this Serell Resort Cabins Administrative Special Review and Appeals, file number 23, Zone 3442. And this is a request for an administrative special review for 3 detached rental cabins with a total of 5 bedrooms and 3 additional sleeping areas for a maximum of 16 guests to be rented out on a short-term basis. And 2 appeals have been requested to Articles 13681C4 and 1342A of the Land Use Code. So we will begin with a staff presentation, and we will go from there.
Excellent, and good afternoon, Commissioners and members of the public. My name is Cassidy Fior, and I'll be presenting on behalf of this item today, being the Serell Resort Cabins Administrative Special Review and Appeals. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge that while I am presenting today, my colleague Samantha Lasher actually put in the majority of the work on this item and didn't feel that I could speak without acknowledging her influence on this. She's off on mat leave, but we'll be back shortly. So to begin, this property is located at 509 Riverside Drive in Estes Park, Colorado. It's also known as Lot 1 of the High Pine subdivision and is approximately 1 acre in size. For reference, it's located approximately 0.6 miles northwest of the intersection of Marys Lake Road and Moraine Avenue. And as you can see, based on the shaded yellow area on this map, it is located just south of the town of Estes Incorporated limits. The applicant and owner is Sean Serell of Riverside Cabins in Estes Park, LLC. The property is located in the EVA1, or Estes Valley Accommodations Low Intensity Use, and that zone district is not proposed to change as part of this application. It is provided water by Estes Park Water District, provided sanitation services by Upper Thompson Sanitation District, and is accessed via Riverside Drive, which is a public road. There are wetlands and floodplain features on the property that I'll discuss in greater detail in a moment. As noted by Commissioner Stevens, the request is for an administrative special review for resort cabins that includes 3 separate rental cabins with a total of 5 bedrooms and 3 additional sleeping areas for a maximum of 16 guests. This request also includes 2 appeals, being an appeal to Article 13681C4 to waive the requirement to install concrete curb, gutter, and sidewalk along the frontage of the property, as well as an appeal to Article 13.4.2A, which requires a net land density of 10,890 square feet of lot area per unit, with net land area calculated by 80% of the lands located in the 100-year floodplain. I would like to note that the applicant also previously requested an appeal to Article 4.4.2.I.1.c of the Larimer County Land Use Code to allow for a wetland buffer of 85 feet for the proposed structures instead of 100 feet as required for Class 3 and 4 wetlands of any size as delineated on Larimer County Partnership Land Use System, Wetland Classification and Protection Program maps. This request was approved via minor modification per Article 4.4.2N of the Land Use Code, which allows for an administrative approval. It's kind of hard to see on these slides, but I did include 2 iterations of the site plan, one being a close-up of the proposed structures on the left-hand side, and then a larger version of the entire site plan on the right. I do want to note that they show the 3 dwellings on the property as well as the parking area, and then if you look to the north, you'll see the blue lines that delineate sort of the various floodplain and flood risk areas, as well as the Big Thompson River. Before we move on to the criteria, I do want to discuss the appeal to Article 13.4.2A, as it is somewhat unusual and is not commonly seen in the rest of the county, as this is something specific to the Estes Valley planning area. So this is what requires a net land density of the 10,890 square feet of lot area per unit, with net land area calculated by 80% of the lands located in the 100-year floodplain. So the policy itself is contained in those 2 in the first screenshot, which just speaks to the density calculation, which states that net land area shall be determined by subtracting from the gross land area the following, and item A, which says 80% of the lands located in the 100-year floodplain. And then on the bottom, the applicant did provide the site density calculations, which show that when you subtract those lands from the total, you end up with 31,051 square feet of net land area, whereas 32,670 would typically be required to support 3 units on the property. For background, this application was submitted originally in March of 2023. And in 2023, the resort lodge or resort cabins definition for low intensity was defined as a building or group of buildings under single management and ownership containing rooms and or units available for temporary rental to transient guests, and where the primary attraction is generally recreational features or activities with no more than a total of 20 guest rooms or 20 guest units. This is a low intensity accommodation use per Article 13, which is the Estes Valley article in Larimer County Land Use Code. It is permitted in the EVA1 zoning district following administrative special review at the time of the application. And this property is not subject to the Estes Valley short-term rental waitlist and cap. While the administrative special review approval could be delegated to the Community Development Director, it has been requested by the Director that the Board of County Commissioners make a decision on both of the appeal requests as well as the administrative special review. Community notice was provided to 164 property owners within 500 feet of the subject property and in the surrounding subdivisions. This notice occurred multiple times based on the time frame of the application. So the first notice was in March of 2023. The second notice was in February of 2024. The Estes Valley Planning Advisory Committee notice went out in October of 2024. And then the BCC land use hearing notice went out in January of this year. To date, 19 comments have been received in opposition to the request, and common concerns expressed include the size of the property, wetland, flooding, wildlife and tree preservation concerns, diminished property values, and impacts to views. And I have included a map on the right of the property notification area. We received a number of technical and supporting documentation, which I'm not going to read in great detail, but this is what the applicant submitted as part of the original application, as well as 2 subsequent resubmittals based on feedback given by referral agencies and members of the public. We also heard from the Estes Valley Planning Advisory Committee. So they did have a variety of questions around the tree preservation plan, the wildlife preservation plan, how long the zoning has been in place, and the zoning of neighbors across the river, which you can see on the right-hand side. As well as they asked about the date of code changes for wetland setback, but there had been no recent code changes. At the end of that meeting, Estes Valley Planning Advisory Committee members voted 6-0 to recommend approval of the Serell Resort Cabins Administrative Special Review and Appeals, subject to the review of the county's environmental planner, who we have sitting at the table, to ensure that the wetlands quality can be maintained. And staff were able to review the proposal and respond in the affirmative that they could support it. We also heard from a variety of referral agencies. I'm not going to go through in great detail, but we'll highlight a couple. So the first being Larimer County Engineering Department, which was overall satisfied with the revisions provided by the applicant and the conditions of approval. They are generally supportive of the appeal request for curb, gutter, and sidewalk to be waived. A floodplain development permit would be required if any grading or development is proposed in the floodplain, which it is not currently proposed. Environmental Planning also reviewed the proposal and was satisfied with the tree preservation plan and was generally supportive of the reduced wetland buffer to preserve the mature trees on site. The town of Estes also provided comments that requested at a minimum a 50-foot setback from the riverbank, which was met, as well as no development in the special flood hazard area. And the Larimer County Department of Health and Environment was satisfied with the revisions and conditions of approval proposed as part of the development. Referral agency comments can be found in greater detail in the agenda packet. We'll first address the review criteria for the appeals. I'm not going to go into great detail, but happy to answer any questions that you may have. In your packet, I have addressed each of the appeals as separate items under each heading. But when considering whether to approve an appeal to deviate from a standard or requirement of the code other than a minimum lot size requirement, county commissioners may grant the appeals subject to safeguards and conditions consistent with their findings concerning the following factors. The county commissioners will consider each of the following factors and make findings pertaining to each one, which in their discretion applies to the appeals. The first is approval of the appeal will not subvert the purpose of the standard or requirement. Approval of the appeal will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or property values in the neighborhood. Approval of the appeal is the minimum action necessary. Approval of the appeal will not result in increased cost to the general public. And approval of the appeal is consistent with the intent and purpose of the code. In this case, staff did find that the criteria for both appeal requests, as discussed in your packet, have been met. Now we'll discuss the review criteria for the administrative special review, being the resort cabins use. So in reviewing a proposed special review application, the director or county commissioner shall consider the general approval criteria in 638D and also the following. The proposed use has minimal impacts on existing and future development of the area. Any impacts associated with the environment, wildlife, access, traffic, emergency services, and a variety of other factors have been adequately addressed and or mitigated. The recommendations of referral agencies have been considered and adequately addressed. And if within a GMA district, the proposed use is consistent with the applicable supplementary regulations, or if none, with the comprehensive plan. And lastly, that the applicant has demonstrated that this project can meet applicable additional criteria as listed in Article 3.0 use regulations for the Estes Valley planning area. In this case, Staff are looking to the commissioners to determine whether the first two criteria, being that the proposed use has minimal impacts on existing and future development of the area, as well as that any impacts associated with the environment and related factors have been adequately addressed or mitigated. As we were not able to make a conclusive determination as to whether they were met. However, staff were of the opinion that items 3 through 5 had been met and were adequately addressed. So as a result, we will not be making a specific recommendation regarding this approval or this application, but again, have found that the application meets all other criteria. So I have provided 2 motions on the screen, one being for denial or one being for approval. There is the option to also be more selective in your approval in the sense that there are 2 appeals being heard and the administrative special review approval. So you could choose to approve or deny any selection of those based on your deliberations. I'm happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is here to address the proposal as well.
Thank you, Cassidy. Are there any questions for staff? Go ahead, Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Cassidy. Appreciate it. Can you go back a few slides to the site plan expert? I think it's attachment A, and maybe the ones before that. Yeah, those are fine. So I'm trying. There's a lot on this slide, and I see it in my packet as well. The 2 green lines. One is the 100-foot setback, and the other one's the 85. Is that how I'm reading that?
That's correct.
And was there comments from the director regarding that, reasons behind approving the change in that criteria?
Absolutely. So the director, following a long sort of conversation with both the applicant and his consultants, as well as environmental planning and planning staff, did find that to not reduce the wetland buffer requirement would result in a number of mature trees on site to be removed. And reducing the wetland buffer to that 85 feet did allow for a large number of those mature trees to remain on site. There's a really helpful image in your tree preservation plan that illustrates where those trees would be maintained.
So if I might, Madam Chair. So there's 2 buildings that are inside that zone. And is it the discussions with staff? Because I do, it's hard to see without, the topography and the pictures where all the trees are at, that both those buildings could not be moved even just 10 feet to be able to accommodate a bigger, a more appropriate, in my opinion, zone.
I'm happy to pull up the tree preservation plan. I think I would direct that to the applicant and his team, just to address that a little bit further.
I can wait on that then. And then it seems, and again, like I'm trying to read this, can you show me exactly, because there's, like I said, there's a lot on the slide where the 100-year floodplain is?
If you give me one moment, I'm just going to pull up the larger version of the site plan so we can zoom in.
Thank you very much.
While we're pulling that up, can I ask a question of Frank? Frank, we're not here to hear that appeal of the wetland buffer, though, correct? Because that's been decided administratively.
That's my understanding. That's correct, Commissioner. I think that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chair, I'm not trying to ask that. I'm just trying to understand the landscape of the configuration of the land and the trees and kind of the lesser of how it was put together. That's my question.
Okay.
So I'm not trying to go down that
We
avenue.
have that tree map in our.
Yeah,
okay.
I know. Yes.
All right, so I do have the site plan available, and I'm happy to zoom in if that's helpful.
Yes, please, that would be helpful. So the blue line is the floodplain, and the 100-year floodplain overlay is the other line. I guess the two green lines are what's confused me about where is the wetland setback and where is the floodplain.
So the first green line to the north is the 100-year floodplain overlay, and then the second green line to the south is the 100-foot wetland setback, or wetland buffer.
Okay, that's helpful. And okay, I think that's all I had. I need to just have that clarified. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kvalis, any questions for staff? Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Madam Chair. First, as a quick comment, it may not be that important, but I notice in the title page of our packet, it indicates that the BCC hearing date as January 31st, 2025. I'm not sure how important that is, but we may want to update that. By way of questions, and Cassidy, thank you. I think you may have already answered this. So this request, the application first came in, I think, in 2023, and we were operating under a different set of land use code regulations. And I think in one statement you indicated that if it was a new application for this purpose, it would not comply with what the current standards are. Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Absolutely. So it's my understanding that the resort cottages or resort lodge use has been removed as a permitted use from the EVA1 zone district now, but was not at the time of the application.
And is the reason that the folks are applying for resort lodge cabins accommodation rather than a short-term rental, is that because of the configuration and it fits that and it's appropriate? Some of the public comment has suggested that it may be a workaround regarding short-term rental caps in the Estes Valley and so forth.
Absolutely. So it's actually due to the number of units proposed on site. So anything more than sort of that one rental unit on site would meet the definition of the resort lodge cottage use. It's meant to be sort of more than just renting out your primary home. It's more so like, a service for transient guests, and a number of them on site.
Thank you. I thought I had a couple of other questions. Please give me a moment. And we'll be very interested to hear from the applicant regarding the tree preservation plan and the wetlands mitigation. I looked at a lot of pictures that helped me to visualize the actual location, and there do seem to be a lot of ponderosa pine and mature trees, and I know that there's going to be an effort to try to mitigate that and preserve as many of those trees as possible. So I'm anxious to hear about that. It looks like I think it's best. I'm fine for now, Cassidy. Thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Commissioner Shannon McNally, any further questions for staff?
Not at this time. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, then we will bring the applicant up. Would the applicant please come forward? You would have 10 minutes to do your presentation.
Great. Hello, my name is Sean Serell, and I'm the applicant, and my wife and I are owners of the property. To give you an idea or the background, my wife and I have been longtime residents in Fort Collins and Larimer County for the past 20 years. We were looking to kind of build a retirement and short-term rental investment property in Estes Park. We love Rocky Mountain National Park. And so we purchased this property in 2019. At the time, there was a land use agreement, and you guys are all much more experts than I am in that agreement, but with the town of Estes Park that allowed for 3 short-term rentals to be used on this property. They did not have a cap at that time, like Larimer County does, of only 1 short-term rental per property. So we started developing the property, working with planners and coming up with the application, and we had notice for a community meeting that was provided with the town of Estes Park because we were operating under the development. And that was scheduled for March of 2020, and COVID happened. And at that time, that was prior to Zoom meetings and all that stuff. So our meeting got postponed. My wife and I are both in the medical community. I don't know how much you guys remember of the pandemic, but I'm a physician at Poudre Valley Hospital, and my focus was on that. Not being a land use developer, I was unaware of the expiration of the land use agreement that occurred in May of 2020 between Larimer County and the town of Estes Park. So our plans to develop this with 3 separate small cabins were now no longer applicable under that application because we had not done that formal community meeting and not submitted our initial application. Can you hear? I'm sorry.
Go a little closer to the mic.
You're one of those taller folks.
Okay.
Yes, that. Thank you, sir.
So subsequent to the land use agreement expiration, we developed a new, with working with the planners, it came to be that the easiest way to accomplish this was through the resort lodge cabin application. So we made that application, and we've had 2 subsequent revisions of the floodplain, which have kind of delayed this. This is why it's been 2 years. So we've had site plan changes regarding that. Part of the changes that occurred when that land use agreement was the town of Estes Park has a 50-foot setback from wetlands. The county has 100. So there was this kind of disconnect between our original plans and then what we were seeing with the current county requirements. The request for that 85-foot setback is to preserve as many of the large trees on the property as possible. Cassie, I don't know if you can pull up that tree preservation plan. It might be easier. I'm sure you guys have already seen it, but if we moved 2 of those buildings back, they would encroach on the rather large central tree that's located as tree number 1. That's the largest tree on the property that we're hoping to preserve by kind of building units around it. So that's kind of what the tree preservation plan is kind of fitting the units. It was different, and we had to move it again because of the floodplain changes. So now everything's out of the floodplain. The wetland setback is the variance that we're looking to do in order to preserve those large trees. Several of the community comments have pointed out the fact that we're trying to overdevelop this property. We're trying to do a large scale accommodations and things like that. And I would like to point out that when I was up in meeting with the Estes Valley Planning and Advisory Commission, and they went over the property, they kind of were disagreeing with that. This is rather small scale in nature. The total site development is 3,700 square feet of buildable space, which for an acre property is rather modest. We're not trying to overdevelop and put 3 units with 3 bedrooms and 3 baths each. One unit's 3 bedroom, 2.5. The other's 2 bedrooms, and the other single is a 1 bedroom, 1 bath unit. We're trying to fit it into the scale and development of the property that would feel like a farmhouse or kind of farm lodge cabin. They're not a large, development with a bunch of condominiums and things like that. We've also had feedback and research in the market with Airbnb and short-term rentals. They're requesting smaller units. A lot of renters are small families. They want to go up with, 1 or 2 bedrooms and not have to go rent a 5,000 square foot home with 6 bedrooms. So that was one of the other reasons that we're seeking multiple short-term rentals in a smaller kind of scale development. As part of my research in developing this and responding to the community, and I think one of the comments was, why did we put some of the units certain places, and it's primarily for the tree preservation. One of the other units, our neighbor directly to the east is building a home there, and that's one of the reasons that it's labeled, the fishing cabin is pushed a little bit farther, and that's to give a little gap in spacing in the houses, so we're not staring across at each other's windows. He's a little closer to the road, so that was one of the other reasons for that location. If we were to build a single-family house here, it could easily, a 5,000 square foot house would easily fit on an acre property. We would not be required, as I understand it, to adhere to the wetland setback with the construction of a single-family home. That is not a requirement. So we are trying to do our best to maintain that setback and preserve the wetlands. But if we were unable to do this, we would likely just develop it with one large single-family home that would still rent out with the short-term rental as the guidelines there. As far as the two appeals, I'm not sure technically. I think the wetland setback's not an appeal at this point, but the other two appeals for the curb, gutter, and sidewalk, talking with engineering, and if you drive to the property, there's no other sidewalks, there's no other curbs within a half mile of the place. So it would be kind of an island of a sidewalk that is to nowhere and provides no real purpose. And as far as my understanding with engineering in the water drainage across the property, the curb and gutter could actually be a detriment to the sheet flow property across the plain. I do have Frank from Van Horn Engineering. If you need more comments about, I know there were several community concerns regarding floodplains and things like that. He would be the expert I would recommend and defer to. The other appeal that we're requesting is for the site density planning. When we originally purchased the property, and again back into that land use agreement was with the town of Estes, they had a round up type clause in their units. And so at the time when we purchased the property and originally started developing it, again without a formal application, the site density calculations would allow you to put 3 units on the property with that round up mechanism, which is not part of the Larimer County guidelines. The additional unit that we are requesting, so that third unit, so to speak, as part of that land use density, is small. Again, it's 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 750 square feet, and it's not encroaching on any other buildable land area. It's a overhead over the garage unit that would be there. So that wouldn't really increase the effective site density of how the land would appear with the units developed. And other than that, our calculations also for the site density have been impacted by the floodplain that has changed twice since we purchased the property. And so that decreases the net land area that we're able to calculate because that floodplain has increased actually with new FEMA data and whatever those calculations have. So that's also made it a little bit more difficult to make that density calculation. But regardless, with the updated floodplain calculations and site density calculations, we're within 5% of the required site density calculations for the property. So I feel that's within a margin of error that, again, 3 small units developing on the property with about 3,700 square feet is, in my opinion, not an overdevelopment of this property, and I feel would be appropriate for the land use that we've applied for.
Thank you, Dr. Serell. And you're done with your presentation?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you had a minute left if you had any. Okay. All right. Are there any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Kafalis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Serell. I'm wondering, can you say a little bit more about the wildlife preservation plan? Looking at various photographs, it seems like a fairly wooded area and certainly very conducive for elk migration. And I know that based on what we read, the intent, of course, is to allow for that wildlife migration corridor along the riverbanks there to occur. But can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of wildlife there. It's, I've seen elk bedded down along the river several times visiting the property. I've never seen any wildlife up on that. There's the riverland floodplain area that's where most of the wildlife beds down and stays, and then there's kind of a plateau that comes up where the units are planned. I've not seen any wildlife in that area, so The intent was to preserve that corridor along the river, that 100-foot setback from the river, that would allow that wildlife to go through our property and the neighboring property.
A couple of follow-ups. Thank you. Is there a way to go to the picture on page 75 of our packet, which shows the property? Can you put that on the screen? Where I'm going with that, sir, is trying to get a visual of where you're proposing to put the 2 units, the farmhouse unit and the fishing cabin, as well as what would go above the garage. Is that something we can do, Cassidy? And while she's doing that, 2 other questions, and then I'll be done for now for you to consider. One is, in some of the public comment, I thought I read that the exterior of the proposed units, the color of the exterior, someone had suggested white. And I wonder if you could at some point speak to that. It seems like if the goal is to try to get things to blend into the surroundings, white would not be the best color. So I don't know if you want to tackle that one at the moment.
Sure, I'm happy. I did see that comment,
Okay.
and the current plan or kind of style that I talked about with the Estes Valley Planning Advisory Committee was a modern farmhouse for that, what we call the farmhouse. So a lot of that's typically white siding, dual chimneys on either side, covered porch and patio on the front and back. And then the garage or carriage house would be similar in style that would match the farmhouse. And then the fishing cabin would be primarily stone or wood siding. I would disagree with their comments that white is not appropriate for Estes Valley. The Stanley Hotel is probably the most iconic hotel in the valley, and it's white with a red roof and looks very nice, in my opinion. And I think farmhouse color white is very traditional in terms of kind of what we were looking for. But that has not been finalized, I guess, at this point.
Just something to think about, sir. I recognize the color of the Stanley Hotel, but it's way up high, and whatever color that might have been painted, it's still quite visible. May I offer one more question while we're looking for the map, and
Yes, you may.
then I should be done for a bit. Regarding the carriage house or the unit that is proposed on top of the garage, it's been referenced as an accessory dwelling unit or as an accessory living area. Is that still how it's categorized? Because I thought I saw somewhere, sir, that if that is the case, then we need to go through some of that.
Correct. I believe at one point previously it was referenced as an ADU because it was connected to the farmhouse by a breezeway. So that was a previous application, maybe that was changed. So currently it's on one of the drawings there looks like there's a pathway. That's not a connected hallway. That was a raised pathway to stay out of the snow and allow drainage to go underneath it. And so it would be considered a separate dwelling as far as I'm aware.
Cassidy, the one you had before that is the picture, the overhead, is there a way to make it bigger? Perfect. Dr. Serell, can you comment where these proposed units would go? There are a lot of trees there.
Correct. They're going to be closer to the road. So
Yes, I
there's
understand
one
that.
right under the one Riverside. That is
That space.
that space is going to be where the farmhouse and then the carriage house kind of would occupy. And where that sampling point C is an approximation of where the fishing cabin would be. The red marker in the center is the largest tree on the property. That's about a 36-inch diameter trunk, and that's the
And
primary.
your intention is to preserve that one.
Correct.
I saw that in the site plan.
That's the primary focus of preservation. There's a lot of smaller trees that have grown up since this picture was taken. 1 to 2 inch diameter, but the largest trees, we're trying to preserve as many trees as possible, and so the current site plan reflects that.
Some trees will have to be removed.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Cassidy.
Thank you. Commissioner Shattuck McNally, do you have questions of the applicant?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here, Doctor. And thank you for your service during the pandemic. So I certainly understand that very well. I haven't talked, I know we talk about wetlands and things. I'm a huge advocate for these. I don't hear much people talking about riparian areas. This is a critical riparian area. Can't go back and undo things that I've done in the past. And so I'm going to direct my comments and questions into two areas. First, I don't know if you know, the riparian areas are less than 2% of the state's landmass, but they're incredibly important as they provide critical habitat for over 90% of Colorado's wildlife, biodiversity, birds, mammals, fish. And so, in my opinion, they should be protected and regarded as such at all costs. And so the biodiversity coming out of Rocky National Park and the overall ecosystem health is really intense and important in these areas, especially a small area. And so anytime this encroaches on, the center of the river or any of those floodplains or anything, this raises my hackles and makes me have concerns. These are green zones, and they're just really important for migration breeding zones. And there's a lot of links from the report from Codex. There's lynx, there's golden eagles, there's lots of wildlife in that area. And so increasing the intensity, since it's going to be 3 cabins, 3 sets of folks possibly, and a fishing cabin, this does increase the impact and the intensity on this property. Even though there's other homes and the traffic, I'm up there every week. I understand this area very well. Been go up there every year of my life, and I've seen it kind of encroach into these areas where it's really a lot of wildlife and ecosystem conflicts. So, what is your plan to address how to protect and preserve this riparian area with this increase of use, if potentially approved?
Correct. So our intent is to protect and preserve the wetland and that area as much as possible. We did have a wetland expert. Her name is Darcy Tiglis. Her, I believe, comment is attached to that. She surveyed the property twice, looking for her feedback in terms of what we can do to preserve that. Again, with the setback changes, I would agree. You can look at the map that was there. The units directly across the river were developed under different guidelines and are significantly more encroaching on the river and the wetlands. We've worked with the Larimer County Department of Wildlife and their recommendations to preserve the wetlands with regard to that reduced buffer of from 100 feet to 85 feet. And the feeling of between my understanding of their department as well as Darcy Tiglis's recommendation was that the preservation of the large trees on the property is a much more beneficial habitat preservation than the 15 feet buffer to the wetland would be. In terms of development of the place, none of the development for our property is proposing on any of the floodplain area where the primary that riparian area is. It's kind of 2 terraces that are there, so the floodplain area is kind of lower down, and then the area for the housing development that's out of the floodplain is above that and kind of much drier. So there would be no development planned for any of that floodplain area. And then that would be fenced off and cordoned on that 85-foot setback from the wetlands when development's occurring.
Okay, that's helpful. In your presentation, you mentioned quite a bit about when you had bought the property and former IGA had a different agreement between the city and the town, but that has long expired, and this is 5 years later. And it seems like you still want to try to fit that plan in, your old plan, into current codes. And it sounds like some things have changed for you to adjust to this, but really the land use code has changed quite a bit even since 2019. So I'm curious, when you talked about having 3 opportunities and still the fishing cabin, was there still kind of trying to figure out a way to get the 3 different areas in, or were you looking to just try to adapt into the new codes? Does that make sense? I mean, it seems I understand the frustration with that was then, sure. This is now, but these codes put in and have been in process, and it feels like we're trying to squeeze the 2019 plan into a 2025 code. I'm just curious about that.
Correct. I I wouldn't say I'm trying to squeeze anything in. I would say when we purchased the property in 2019, we had an understanding of what the land use code was. We moved forward pretty rapidly with development of that plan. My understanding of that land use agreement between the town and Estes Park, it had been in place 19 or 20 years. This was not something that anybody I've talked to was expecting to expire. Again, this is not my department. I do healthcare and I like to take vacation. So we were looking at it for investment and doing, again, smaller short-term rental properties. We had the concept and the idea was we had a property up in Frisco, Colorado that we used to visit, and it was backcountry cabins. They were very small units. Ours was 1,000 square feet. Some were 1,200, some were 600. But it was smaller units on one property that felt isolated. So they were legally townhomes, but you didn't have any shared walls. We really enjoyed that kind of concept, and that was kind of what we were trying to bring to this property was 3 smaller units that we could rent out and people could enjoy it rather than building, again, one large resort house, so to speak. So that's kind of where our concept came from. I can't tell you exactly how it's gotten to 2025, but I was watching the presentation and surprised that it's been this long. Again, from when that land use expired, I don't know how many times the code had been changed in terms of different land use opportunities for that EVA1 zoning. When I initially looked to find how when we developed this, that code didn't even exist. It had been going through several different revisions in terms of the Estes Valley and planning area. And so I think Cassidy's my third planner I've been working on. Samantha was the second. And the first one, we were going through different revisions to kind of say, hey, this is what we were originally planning. We understand the land use agreement expired. How can we fit this plan into the current code? And this resort lodge cabin was what was suggested as the most, as what would work with what we were looking to do for the property. Subsequent to that, I think I started the application in 2023. We've had 2 different floodplain changes resulting in site plan changes, and the floodplain increased. So we had to move some of those units back, and so that's kind of been part of the process. And then we did the Estes Valley Planning Advisory Committee, and that was, I believe, in October. And this was, between planners the next time this has come around. So I feel like as far as my perspective, it's been one continuous application for 5 years that's been derailed by COVID, land use changes, and things like that. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it brings some context. I appreciate your answer. And then I see here with the site plan map, there's parking for 3 cars. And I'm not sure, I don't know if this is a staff question or another question, but I see the garage as well. At least that's what it says. I know there's a garage, but the hunting cabin, can you expand a little bit more? What's the parking situation? What does that look like around that hunting cabin?
So currently there's 3-car garage that would all be covered, and then 3-car parking spaces, one of which is not reflected on the site plan, would be ADU accessible in terms of sizing. That parking may extend closer to the fishing cabin depending exactly where the trees are. But that was kind of basically, in the other thing that came up, or the change that sometimes you may see, was that it was originally going to be crushed rock or gravel. But my understanding of the current code is it has to be paved. And so there may be a change in terms of reducing or trying to optimize, how little concrete or pavement we have to put on the unit. And then there's also a fire truck turnaround requirement that's a certain radius that my understanding is this meets those requirements. But the parking would be 6 vehicles.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for right now.
Any other questions? I don't have any. I'm going to wait till after public comment if we have some, but you're welcome to ask a question if you'd like.
Just looking at one of the referral agencies, the Estes Valley Fire Protection District, they've indicated they don't have any issues with the overall proposal, but they did mention about a certain classification of fire suppression sprinkler system I presume that is going to happen. And then they also mentioned something about there'll be a need to have some kind of hydrant installed. Can you speak to that, sir?
Yeah, so yes, all the units will be fully sprinklered, and that's my understanding. That's a current building requirement currently, anyways. But that's the plan to fully sprinkler them. I did see their comment about a new hydrant needing to be placed, and I'm unsure where that requirement came from because I'd have to look at it. It's been submitted, but the distance to the fire hydrants meets whatever guidelines or requirements there were, as well as the water pressure. So it's unclear to me why a new hydrant would be required. But I did see that comment. So if one needs to be put in, we'll do it.
Thank you. I think that's all for now.
Thank you. Well, you can go to your seat, Dr. Serell, and we'll call you back up if we have further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will now open the public hearing on this item. Commenters will be allowed 3 minutes to provide testimony. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to this proposal? Okay. No hands raised. Is there anyone online who wants to speak to this proposal?
If there are any members of the public online who would like to speak on this case, please use the raise hand function. We do have hands raised.
Okay. Well, should we line them up, queue them up, and let's get them rolling? So I don't know who was first, but
Ronald Springer, you have permission to talk. You'll have 3 minutes. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, my name is Ronald Springer. We live at 676 Park River Place, which is directly across from this site. One main thing I want to say is that they have already affected the wildlife. We have lived here for 15 years, year-round. And we typically see a number of elk going right across from our place, crossing the river, going up the mountain on the other side. So they have built this right in a major elk run. And since they have started construction, basically the elk have quit going through.
thank you, Mr. Springer. You still have a couple more minutes. Is that all you have to say, or would you like to add to that?
Well, we're not real happy with the development. I'm super unhappy with the fact they set a 100-foot setback and then they modify it. If they're not going to have a 100-foot setback, change the setback to 85 feet, but don't go modifying it for people for special purpose. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Springer. Take the next person.
Scott Meyer, you now have permission to talk. Please unmute yourself and you have 3 minutes.
Scott, can you hear us?
Scott, if you are speaking, we cannot hear you. I'm going to mute you and unmute you and see if that helps.
Maybe we can go back to Scott and see if we can get him hooked up later if there are other people to speak.
Scott, I'm going to remove your permission. We will come back to you. Thank you. If there are any other members of the public that would like to speak on this case, please use the raise hand function. We still only have one hand raised. Scott Myers, I'm going to give you permission to speak again. Please unmute yourself.
Scott, we see you're unmuted, but we still cannot hear you.
It doesn't sound like it's working. So, was he one of the people who was able to give any written comment prior to? Yeah, he did give it. So Scott, well, just if you can hear us, we did receive your written comments then, and they are part of the public record. So I apologize that you weren't able to speak right now, but we will certainly take your written comments into consideration. Is that fine? All right. So last chance, no one online wants to speak besides Scott? No. Anyone in the room? Last chance? All right, we will close public comment. And I'll ask the applicant, you would have 5 minutes of rebuttal if you'd like to rebut anything you heard in the one comment that was made. That was a comment from Ronald Springer about the wildlife and the elk run and
Yeah, thank you. I heard his comment and appreciate that. I think there appears to be some confusion regarding the public in that we're not doing any development currently on our property. And I know a lot of the public comments were directed towards our neighbor who is developing the property. So just to point that out, that is, and I would expect, just common sense construction activity is going to disrupt elk and make them less excited to go to an area where there's digging and moving rocks and things like that compared to an established home with vegetation that's there. So I would expect the wildlife, as I think most people that go up there see the elk go everywhere. And a little construction noise, I think, would be probably the biggest reason that that's happening. But again, that's not our property.
thank you very much. All right. So we will bring it back to the commissioners. Commissioners, any further questions for staff or the applicant before we go to deliberation? Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
So, just clarification, this is an EVA1, and I know where that is. So I know the standards there, but there's other ability to build single-family homes in EVA1.
I believe there is. I would need to pull up the table of allowed uses for this area for more detail.
And applicant made a comment about that building a single-family home is not subject to the same guidelines. Is that
Correct. So similar to discussions that we've had before, a single-family home with a building permit does not meet the definition of development in our land use code currently. So it wouldn't need to meet the Article 4 standards, including that setback from the wetland.
okay? That's helpful. And I was looking through the comments from Essex Valley Fire Protection and the conditions. Was there a condition of the other fire hydrant in the conditions of approval? There isn't. Okay. I didn't see one either. I just want to make sure it wasn't missing. Thank you, Commissioner. And then also, can you remind me, maybe this is Frank, is this an automatic approval for a license or do they need the license? I mean, I'm trying to understand what's all happening here because I see comments in the property managers and other things on there. Whoever.
I believe that the resort cabin use itself grants the use for short-term rental purposes. I don't believe it needs to go back through for an additional approval.
Let me check on that just really quick. Excuse me. There are two separate things, right? There's the land use approval, which is what's before you now, but I just need to look at the application of the ordinance that we passed to see if this meets that or not, but I can find that out pretty quick.
Okay, that'd be helpful because It just feels like we're going from point A to point Q, and we haven't had one like this before. And I'm just curious because was not my understanding. But and then my last question for right now, as I'm trying to sort through all of this comments that I had on the side here. Um, the other Are there three different motions for any of this? And are they all contingent that they need all to go forward, or is one? Can you explain that?
Absolutely. So how I've currently drafted potential motions is I have one that is a complete approval of all three. I have one that is a complete denial of all three. And then I have some where I've broken out the approvals of some and denial of others, depending on direction from commissioners.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Cassie. Appreciate it. I think that's all I have. If my colleagues have their questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kafal's questions, please go ahead.
Thank you. Cassidy, question for you, and just to follow up on the Estes Valley Fire Protection District, might be a question for our county attorney. But regarding public comment, it seems like the 16 comments we received up until today, I believe, they seemed like they were all coming from folks who lived on the other side of the river. I wonder, were there any comments, or was there any feedback for people living south of Riverside Drive or east or west of Riverside Drive?
I don't believe so. I think the majority were from the north side of the river.
Okay. And then my question to whoever wishes to answer is, it seems to me we make reference to the need to pass a wildfire home ignition zone inspection, but I don't believe there's a reference to what the Estes Valley Fire Protection District was asking about access and the fire hydrant issue. And we've heard about the sprinkler system. Seems like we ought to include that in there.
We can certainly add that as a condition. They will need to address those items at building permit through the fire district.
Oh, they will?
Yes.
Okay, then it's probably not necessary here. Is that correct?
That was the approach that I was taking, but happy to include it as a condition.
Well, maybe Frank is deep in thought, but perhaps he could comment on that.
I'm sorry, I was reading the other thing. Can you repeat what you just said?
Just that I think both Commissioner Shattuck, McNally, and I raised the question, should there be a condition of approval added for this land use application regarding the requirements or the requests of the Estes Valley Fire Protection District, or is that better suited? They, in the building permit process, they would need to comply with that.
I think either way is fine. They're going to have to meet it in the building permit process anyway. But if, the fire districts, and I don't know all the technical requirements, but there are thresholds of water availability if you have access to them, how far away it is. I mean, they have sort of criteria for what needs to be required. My suggestion would be to just say, if you want a condition, to say you must comply with the requirements of the fire district with regard to available water. And I don't know if that's in there or not, but.
And thank you. And if I may, it's not just the matter of water, it's also the matter of the roads being such that they can take the extra weight of fire trucks and access and ingress and egress. So it's maybe a condition that says complying with the requirements of the fire district. I'm not sure how that would be worded.
Yeah, I think those fire district codes, you can just generally reference the applicable fire code in that district, which I guess is Estes Valley Fire. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Yes, I believe so, and count on you folks to come up with the exact wording.
I think, yeah, we can work on getting something together.
When we get to that point.
The other thing to answer Commissioner Shattuck McNally's question, so I don't mean to interrupt if you guys wanted to, but.
No, happy to have that answer. Thank you.
So I'm looking at the ordinance that was passed, and the ordinance applies to short-term rentals as that's defined in the code. This is a resort lodge, which is a separate deal. So it wouldn't be under that because it's in the accommodation zone. So I don't think it would be applicable. I don't know if planning disagrees with that, but I think that because it's an accommodation that's a resort lodge and not a short-term rental, the ordinance wouldn't apply to it.
That makes sense.
Any other questions, Commissioner? Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
So with that information, what oversight or accountabilities with those kinds of places when it comes to running commercial business and all kinds of things?
Well, they're still going to have to, I mean, when the building code comes in, they're still going to have to meet all the requirements for those resort lodges because it's not a primary residence. And so all the things about, Mr. Freed's not here, but that the, the firewalls, the posting of like they still have to, they still have to meet all the requirements for building for what's a resort lodge, which would be similar more to like a hotel or like a motel, because it's not a primary residence. The main difference between like a short-term rental, we define as basically a primary residence that you're renting out, but this is not. This is more like a hotel or a motel, or it's sort of designed as that.
But I'll clarify my question. Since it seems like this will be out the three separate things will be rented out as short-term rentals, really, in the spirit of things, even though this is resort lodge, because there is no, I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like there's say three. So what is the accountability for noise and enforcement? You know, there's what kind of mechanisms and enforcement and things like that.
Well, this is a special review, right? So you can put whatever conditions in there, and then if they don't comply with those, we can revoke the special review. So there would be a show cause hearing. They would get notified that there were violations of whatever the conditions were. They'd come in and you could revoke it. You could pull the permit.
Because and forgive me, it's a lot happening today. I didn't see anything about fire pits or anything like that. They could have a fire pit. They could do all these things, correct?
If I can jump in here.
Yeah.
So if you look at the conditions of approval that have been suggested, the majority of those are very similar, if not the same, to what we would include in a typical administrative special review approval for a short-term rental. And they would still need to pass, I think like Commissioner Kafala's mentioned, the wildfire ignition home inspection piece. And they would not permit sort of those, the fire pits and those ignition hazards.
But it's usually that's stated in the conditions of approval, so we could add those.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. But so that would be an enforcement. Adding those would provide another layer of protection and enforcement, and like the wildfire, the wildlife. I know they have the mitigation plan, but I don't see an owner's like the owner's manual, and stating about not harassing wildlife or following. I mean, usually we have that with these groups, or maybe I just missed seeing that.
And we do have an operations manual as part of this.
That would be buried in. That would be
correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll ask a question and I'll see if anybody has any other questions. Can you speak to a little bit to how the site density calculation, specifically with is total square feet of the developed units, regardless if they go up or
Correct. So it's actually a calculation of how much net land area needs to be available as a whole property based on the number of units. Okay. It's not tied to the size of the units themselves.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. Any other questions before we move into deliberation? Go ahead, Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Thanks for bringing up that, Commissioner Stevens, because that was a concern as of mine as well. So I just want to restate what she asked again, just so I make sure I heard it. So it doesn't matter the size; it's just the number of units, and it doesn't matter the spacing. It just how many. So they could have any size.
That's correct. The site density requirement is not the same as a lot coverage requirement. It's something, the site density requirement is specific to the Estes Valley planning area, and it was similar to the Estes Valley code that was in place at the time, like Dr. Serell mentioned. And it is specifically sort of calculating that initial density of units based on the available developable area, which is why they use net area, not gross area.
Okay. And that's another layer of complication here. So, okay, that's helpful and not helpful. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Any other questions before we move into deliberation? Commissioner Shattuck McNally? Okay. We will move into deliberation. I'll have Commissioner Kofalos get us started.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to the staff, thanks to my colleagues, certainly at the applicant and all the folks, the couple of folks who offered comment through the virtual platform and all the written comment. I'm able to support this application, including the approval of the administrative special review, as well as the two appeals based on the discussion, based on the information that we've received. I believe all of the review criteria have been met in terms of the general, the review criteria that apply to the special review, and then the other review criteria that apply to the two appeals. And I also think that there's quite an array of conditions of approval that further make sure that this is done properly. We've heard from our referral agencies, and whatever issues or concerns that they've raised have been incorporated for the most part in the conditions of approval. So I am prepared to support this application. I do think we need to add a condition of approval regarding the requests of the Estes Valley Fire Protection District. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate all the massive amount of work done for this application. And I do agree with my colleague about adding the condition of approval for the Estes Valley Fire Protection District. And I would like to also see a condition of approval banning fire pits. However, with that being said, that can be a little more palatable. I still feel uncomfortable that criteria 2 has not been met. I still think that has impacts on the wildlife corridor, and the riparian area is just, I think it's going to be adverse impacts having 3 separate cabins and the increased impact and density of that area, especially when one of them is associated with direct access into the river, because even though they're moved back and even though there was a little bit of leeway, that doesn't mean that humans are going to stay out of that zone. They're all going to be along the river and fishing and hiking and impacting. So with that, I hope my colleagues, I'm sure there might not, I don't know where they're at, but I just feel like criteria for the special administrative review, criteria 2, associated impacts, I don't think have been adequately addressed with the sensitivity of the riparian area, and therefore I cannot support that part of the application. And I still have questions and concerns, and I don't feel the appeal for Article 13.4.2.a. I still feel that they do not meet. I still don't feel they have met the criteria for that appeal. So that's where I'm at, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Like Commissioner Kofalos, I will be supporting this application. I do understand the sensitivity about the riparian area. However, it seems like a single-family home could even be closer to that riparian area and larger than what's been contemplated here. So I think, interestingly, the setup that we have here is actually could potentially be more protective of that area than a single-family home that wouldn't have as many requirements or safety measures associated with it. So I we hear from experts in these kind of, you know, we send these applications out to a variety of experts to get their opinion, and we did not have any expert opinions saying that this would affect wildlife. Now, of course, as the applicant himself stated, there will be probably disruption as the building happens, but I don't think it doesn't seem to be that any other of our partners think that there's a huge concern overall with that, or they would have stated that in the comments that they sent to us. I, for those reasons, I think it does meet the criteria, and I will be supporting the application. The whole application, I am very open to the conditions that were expressed, so no fire pits, and then meeting whatever conditions are imposed by the Estes Valley Fire Authority. But, if there are other conditions that would help you, Commissioner, I'd certainly entertain those as well.
I know it's in the user's guide, but I would like to somehow strongly either post inside the cabins or areas signs regarding the laws about not interacting with wildlife and maybe like leave no kind of trace kind of principles.
Yeah, I would definitely support that. Commissioner Cavalis.
Thank you. Cassidy, would you clarify? I thought you said earlier that as part of the building permit process, I mean, I think you mentioned that it will be needed to have an operations manual as well as including the restrictions on fire pits. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct. There is an operations manual, my apologies, in your packet already, but happy to have that included.
Madam Chair, I know it's in the operational manuals, but it is probably for our experience. People do not read through the entire manual. That's why I'd like to have some extra signage just to state that. And I do want to make it in the conditions of approval so it's very, very clear that there are no fire pits allowed.
Okay, I'm open to that being a condition. That it has to be clearly posted outside of the manual in each residential area, that it would be not to interact with wildlife.
I do have some draft conditions if you would like to see those.
That sounds great. Thank you.
So this slide includes both a suggested motion as well as 3 potential conditions of approval. Happy to reword as necessary.
Those meet your needs, Commissioner Shattuck McNally? Okay, thank you. I do also want to say something that I didn't mention in my support is that the Estes Valley Planning Advisory Committee did recommend approval unanimously on this item. And, that to me, that carries some weight as well. Anything further before I call for a motion?
I'll just
Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
And I know they're probably listening in because I'm the liaison to that Estes Valley Planning Advisory Committee, and so I wasn't present for that portion of that meeting because I try not to be present at that time. I should not be present at that time. Their opinions do carry a lot of weight with me, and I do know this is an EVA 1. However, I feel that this is not meeting the intent of what that classification is, and so that's why I'm kind of holding firm to my support. But I do understand probably what they had a conversation with the applicant, but my concerns and aversion to this is because I believe of the how this is being packaged makes me uncomfortable. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and you're welcome, obviously, to your opinion on that. And I will say, the applicant did express some of the iterations as code and everything changed in the world. And I can't draw intent out of that, but it seems like, they were started under one rule and another rule happened while they were going through this process. I think that there's some, and so, that there again, I'm not trying to dissuade you from your opinion here. I'm just trying to state some facts as I see them.
And
Any-
Madam Chair, if I might, I'm not
Yes,
trying
please
to
go.
imply any intent. I'm just going from what I read in the comments and the progress. And so I'm going with what I read in the packet and from the comments. And that's all I'm going for. I'm not trying to question the applicant's intent. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anything further before we try to get a motion on the table here?
It looks like we have something before us, and if these additional two conditions of approval regarding fire pits and posting the information clearly, visibly, and all of that, if that's what will get us all on the same page, I can support that. Although it is my understanding that that's already part of the package. So I want to make that clear.
I'm not sure this will get us all on the same page, but I think that it will help maybe with some of the concerns that Commissioner Shattuck McNally has. And I think the fire pits are definitely part of what would already happen. I don't necessarily know that the posting of something be outside of the manual would be something. So I'm fine with leaving these three conditions in, knowing that Commissioner Shattuck McNally does not seem likely to approve this anyway. But the motion is yours to make, Commissioner Kafalis, and I'll let you
And
make it as you will.
Thank you. Shall I proceed?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Cassidy. Very helpful to have it right here. I move that the Board of County Commissioners approve the Serell Resort Cabins Administrative Special Review and Appeals, file number 23-Zone 3442, subject to the conditions of approval contained within the staff report and additional conditions as requested by the Board of County Commissioners that are listed here. 1, the applicant is required to meet all applicable requirements of the Estes Valley Fire Protection District. 2, no outdoor fire pits will be permitted on site. And finally, number 3, the applicant must post clearly visible information in the interior of the units regarding wildlife and leave no trace principles.
Thank you, Commissioner. There's a motion on the table. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay.
Nay.
All right, that passes 2-1. That is the only item on our agenda this afternoon, and there are no other items. So we stand adjourned at 4:22 p.m. Thank you, everyone.